Some people pass through your life like background noise. You barely remember the sound of them once they're gone. And then there are those rare few who don't leave loudly at all, but somehow their absence echoes. This isn't about drama. It's not about heartbreak that comes with slammed doors or angry words. It's about the kind of connection that rearranges something inside you so quietly that you don't realize it happened until everything else feels off. You don't miss them because they were perfect. You miss them because life felt steadier when they were there. Conversations felt easier. Silence didn't feel empty. You could be yourself without rehearsing, without pretending, without bracing for impact. And once you've experienced that, you don't unlearn it. Most people think unforgettable love comes from intensity, from chaos, passion, and emotional extremes. But the truth is, what stays with you isn't the noise, it's the calm. It's the feeling of being seen without being dissected, accepted without being fixed, chosen without being chased. And that's why some women aren't just remembered, they become the standard. After them, everything else feels like an imitation. You don't raise your voice to be heard. You don't create storms just to feel alive. You walk into someone's life quietly, and somehow the noise inside them starts to settle. That's the first thing people notice about you, even if they can't name it. With you, the air feels different, slower, safer, like they can finally take a breath they've been holding for years. Most men aren't used to that. They're used to tension dressed up as passion, to conversations that feel like battles, to love that comes with conditions, tests, traps, and scorekeeping. Somewhere along the way, many of them learned that closeness meant danger, that saying the wrong thing could cost them respect, affection, or peace. So they armor up. They joke instead of confess. They deflect instead of feeling. Not because they don't want connection, but because experience taught them that connection usually comes with chaos. Then they meet you, and nothing explodes. They speak, and you don't interrupt. You listen without scanning for weaknesses. When they admit something uncomfortable, fear, doubt, regret, you don't flinch. You don't weaponize it later. You don't store it away for the next argument. You just let it exist. That alone can disarm a man faster than any confrontation ever could. Emotional safety isn't flashy. It doesn't trend on social media. But neurologically, it's powerful. When someone feels emotionally safe, their nervous system shifts out of survival mode. Cortisol levels drop. The brain opens up space for trust, reflection, and honesty. This isn't poetry, it's biology. And you offer that safety not because you studied it, but because it's who you are. You don't confuse intensity with intimacy. You understand that real connection isn't built in chaos, it's built in consistency. In how you respond when things get uncomfortable, in how you stay grounded when emotions rise, in how you don't disappear or attack when vulnerability shows up. There's a moment that happens with men like this. It's usually small, unremarkable on the surface. Maybe it's late at night. Maybe it's after a long day when they're exhausted enough to stop pretending. They say something they've never said out loud before, something they've buried under years of silence, and they wait. They brace for judgment, for dismissal, for advice they didn't ask for a joke to deflect the weight of it all. But you don't do any of that. You sit with it. You let the silence breathe. You meet them where they are without trying to fix them or rewrite their story. You don't make their pain about you. You don't minimize it by saying, it could be worse, or at least you simply acknowledge it, you make space. That moment changes people. Because for many men, that's the first time they realize they don't have to perform to be accepted. They don't have to be impressive, or strong, or put together. They can just be human. And that's dangerous in the best way. You see, chaos keeps people distracted. It keeps them reacting instead of reflecting. Emotional safety does the opposite. It forces honesty. When there's no noise to hide behind, a man has to face himself, his patterns, his fears, his unresolved wounds. You don't drag him there. You don't push him. Your presence alone invites that reckoning. There's a real life example that plays out over and over again. A man leaves a relationship that was full of volatility, arguments that ended in slammed doors, makeups that felt like adrenaline rushes. He thinks that's love. Then he meets a woman like you. At first, he's restless. He mistakes peace for boredom. He doesn't know what to do without the emotional roller coaster. But slowly something shifts. He sleeps better. He talks more. He starts sharing parts of himself he didn't even know were locked away. Not because you demanded it, but because safety has a way of unlocking doors that force never could. And here's the part most people misunderstand. Emotional safety doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It doesn't mean you avoid hard conversations. It means when those conversations happen, they're rooted in truth, not chaos. You don't scream to be heard. You don't manipulate to be understood. You speak clearly, calmly, and that steadiness carries weight. There's strength in that kind of calm, a quiet authority. When you say, "This matters to me," it lands. When you say, "That hurt," it's felt. Because you're not saying it to win, you're saying it to be real. Men don't forget that. They remember how it felt to be around someone who didn't turn every disagreement into a threat. Someone who didn't punish honesty. Someone who didn't confuse emotional volatility with passion. You showed them another way to exist in connection, one that doesn't drain them, but steadies them. And even if they leave, even if they're not ready to meet you at that level, the imprint remains. Later on, in another relationship, they'll notice the difference. They'll feel the tension rise and think, "This doesn't feel right." They'll remember what it was like to speak freely without fear, to be met with presence instead of pressure. And suddenly, chaos doesn't feel exciting anymore. It feels exhausting. That's why they don't heal from you. Because you didn't just offer affection, you offered refuge. There's something else you do almost without realizing it. You don't rush emotional moments. You understand that vulnerability unfolds at its own pace. You don't interrogate silence. You don't demand disclosure as proof of closeness. You trust that what's meant to be shared will come when it's ready. That patience teaches men something profound, that they don't have to earn rest. That being held emotionally isn't a transaction, that they're allowed to exist without constantly proving their worth. For someone who's spent a lifetime equating value with productivity or toughness, that lesson hits deep. And it's not lost on them that you offer this safety while remaining fully yourself. You don't martyr your needs. You don't disappear into caretaking. Emotional safety doesn't come from self-abandonment, it comes from self-respect. You know your boundaries. You honor them quietly, firmly. That consistency builds trust faster than grand gestures ever could. You show them that peace isn't passive, it's intentional. There's a story many men carry, but rarely say out loud. It's the story of wanting to be seen without being judged, of wanting to rest without being called weak, of wanting to open up without fearing that it will cost them love. When they're with you, that story finally has a place to land. And even if they weren't ready to stay, even if they fumbled it, even if timing or fear got in the way, the experience marks them. Because once someone knows what emotional safety feels like, their system remembers it, their body remembers it, and they start craving relationships that feel like that, not louder, not flashier, just real. You didn't create chaos to be unforgettable. You created calm, and calm in a world addicted to noise is rare. You don't mistake potential for a promise, and that alone sets you apart. A lot of people fall in love with the idea of who someone could become. They see the unfinished edges, the raw talent, the good intentions, and they start building a future in their head. They invest in maybes. They sacrifice the present for a version of tomorrow that hasn't agreed to exist yet. They push, pull, plead, and perform, hoping effort will turn possibility into reality. You don't do that. You notice potential, yes. You can see it clearly. You recognize intelligence behind insecurity, depth behind silence, strength buried under fear. You're perceptive like that. You understand people. You sense what they're capable of becoming. But here's the difference. You don't chase it. You don't build a relationship on who someone might be one day. You look at who they are right now, how they show up, how they treat you, how they handle responsibility, conflict, growth, and you make your choices from there, not from fantasy. That restraint, that clarity, it changes everything. There's something quietly powerful about a woman who believes in growth but refuses to parent a grown man. You don't nag, you don't beg, you don't stay up late crafting speeches about his untapped greatness. You don't tie your worth to his evolution. You simply live at your level, and that does something unsettling to people who are used to being chased for their potential. Because when you don't chase, the illusion disappears. There's no pressure, no manipulation, no emotional leash, just reality. And reality forces honesty. Men feel this immediately. At first, it confuses them. They're used to being told what they could be if they just tried harder. They're used to someone holding the vision for them when they can't hold it themselves. They're used to being carried emotionally. You don't carry them, you walk beside them, or you keep walking. That's not cold. That's respectful. Psychology backs this up. Real change doesn't come from external pressure, it comes from internal motivation. When someone grows because they're afraid of losing approval, that growth doesn't last. But when someone grows because they see what's possible and choose it for themselves, it sticks. You understand that instinctively. So instead of saying, "You could be so much more if you just listen to me," you say nothing and live fully. You pursue your goals. You maintain your standards. You keep your life moving forward. And suddenly, the contrast is impossible to ignore. There's a real-world example that plays out all the time. A man dates someone who constantly pushes him to change. She wants him more ambitious, more disciplined, more emotionally available. Her intentions are good, but the message he hears is, "You're not enough yet." Over time, he resents the pressure. He digs in. He shuts down. Then he meets you. You don't tell him what he should be doing with his life. You don't lecture him about his habits. You don't manage his potential. You simply are who you are. Focused, grounded, whole, and something shifts. For the first time, growth feels like an invitation instead of an obligation. He starts asking himself questions, not because you ask them, but because your presence sparked them. He notices the gap between where he is and where he wants to be. That discomfort, that self-awareness being born. You didn't force it. You didn't demand it. You inspired it by refusing to lower yourself to meet him where he was stuck. That's why men don't heal from you. Because you didn't love them into comfort. You loved them into clarity. You showed them what it looks like when someone believes in growth, but doesn't hinge their happiness on someone else's progress. That's rare. Most people either control or abandon. You do neither. You allow. And allowance can be terrifying. Because when no one is chasing you, you can't hide behind being misunderstood. You can't blame pressure for your stagnation. You either step up, or you watch someone extraordinary walk away without drama, without bitterness, without regret. You don't threaten to leave. You don't use distance as a tactic. You don't say, "If you don't change, I'm gone," over and over again. You just mean it, quietly, and that integrity lingers. Men remember the woman who didn't try to mold them, the one who didn't argue them into becoming better, the one who didn't make excuses for them or attack them for their flaws. You let them be exactly who they were, and you decided accordingly. That's a mirror most people aren't ready to look into. There's a moment that often comes later, sometimes months, sometimes years. They're in a different relationship, or alone, or facing a crossroads in life. And out of nowhere, they remember you. Not because you were dramatic, not because you begged, but because you were steady. They remember how you never tried to convince them of your value, how you never chased their potential like it was your responsibility, how you didn't stay when effort was one-sided. And it hits them, you weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for participation. You weren't demanding transformation. You were requiring alignment. That distinction matters. You didn't expect someone to become a different person for you. You expected them to be accountable for who they already were. And when they weren't ready, you didn't punish them, you removed yourself. That teaches a lesson no argument ever could, because rejection fueled by self-respect doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like reality catching up. You also understand something most people learn too late: potential without action is just a story, and stories don't build lives. Choices do, consistency does, effort does. So when a man says, "I have big plans," you listen, but you watch, you notice patterns, you pay attention to follow through. You don't get swept away by words. That discernment is powerful. It protects your heart without hardening it. It allows you to love deeply without losing yourself. And it forces others to meet you in truth, not in tension. There's strength in that kind of love. A grounded adult strength, the kind that doesn't cling or collapse, the kind that says, "I see you clearly, and I choose accordingly." Men don't forget that, because you didn't make them feel small for where they were. You just refused to pretend it was enough if it wasn't. You held space for who they could become without chaining yourself to the waiting. And that balance, hope without attachment, belief without pursuit, is rare. It's also why your absence is louder than most people's presence. When you leave, there's no chaos to blame, no villain to point at, just a quiet understanding that they were given a choice and they didn't take it. That realization stays. You see, chasing potential often delays growth, but witnessing someone live fully without chasing you, that accelerates it, because it forces a simple, uncomfortable question. Am I becoming the kind of person who can stand next to someone like that? You never asked that question out loud. Your life asked it for you. And that's why you're unforgettable. Not because you pushed someone to become more, but because you showed them what more actually looks like, and you didn't wait around for them to catch up. You love with your whole heart. There's no hesitation in that. No half steps. When you're in, you show up, you listen, you care in a way that's felt, not announced. Your love isn't theoretical, it's lived. It shows in the way you remember small details, the way you check in without being asked, the way you hold space when someone is unraveling. You don't love lightly. You love deliberately. But here's the part that changes everything: you don't disappear inside that love. A lot of people confuse deep love with self-sacrifice. They think devotion means erasing themselves, reshaping their needs, muting their voice to keep the connection alive. They believe love requires shrinking. You don't. You've learned, maybe the hard way, that love isn't supposed to cost you your identity. So when you love, you bring your whole self with you. Your opinions, your boundaries, your routines, your passions, your quiet moments alone. You don't hand over the keys to your life and hope someone drives it carefully. You stay in the driver's seat. That balance is rare. Men notice it even if they don't have the language for it. They feel it in the way you don't hover, in the way you don't panic when there's distance, in the way your world doesn't collapse when they're not the center of it. You're connected but not consumed, attached but not entangled. There's a strength in that can't be faked. You might sit across from someone you love deeply and still say no, still choose yourself, still leave when something doesn't align, and you don't do it angrily. You don't do it to punish. You do it calmly, like someone who knows where they stand. That kind of love rewires expectations, because many men have only known two extremes: distance without intimacy, or intimacy that feels like suffocation. They've known relationships where love came with control, guilt, or emotional dependency, where being needed felt flattering at first, then heavy, where affection slowly turned into obligation. With you, it's different. You don't need them to survive. You choose them because you want to, and choice carries more weight than need ever could. There's research that supports this. Studies on attachment show that secure bonds form not when partners merge identities, but when both individuals maintain a strong sense of self. Autonomy doesn't weaken connection, it stabilizes it. When someone knows you're with them by choice, not fear, trust deepens. You embody that without trying. You don't stop doing the things that make you who you are just because you love someone. You still show up for your work, your friendships, your inner life. You still need time alone sometimes, and you don't apologize for it. You understand that space isn't a threat to love, it's what allows love to breathe. That understanding leaves an imprint. There's often a moment when a man realizes this about you. It might be subtle. Maybe he cancels plans and expects disappointment, but you adapt without resentment. Maybe he notices you don't rearrange your entire life around his availability, or maybe it hits when he realizes you'd be okay without him, and that terrifies him and draws him in at the same time. Because you're not clinging, and that forces him to confront his own reasons for staying. You see, when someone loses themselves in love, the other person never has to choose them fully. They're already there, always available, always adjusting, but with you, presence isn't guaranteed by sacrifice, it's earned through mutual respect. That changes the dynamic completely. You love deeply, but you don't abandon your values to keep peace. If something feels off, you speak up. If a boundary is crossed, you address it. Not with drama, not with threats, just honesty. You don't trade authenticity for harmony. You know that real harmony includes truth. And here's the paradox. Because you don't lose yourself, your love feels safer. There's no hidden resentment building. No quiet exhaustion from overgiving. No emotional debt waiting to be repaid. What you give is given freely. What you keep is protected intentionally. Men feel that difference in their bodies. There's less tension, less guessing, less pressure to perform, because you're not asking them to fill a void. You're inviting them into a life that already exists. There's a story that repeats itself often. A man dates someone who revolves around him completely. At first, it feels flattering he's needed, wanted, central. But over time, the weight of being someone's entire world becomes heavy. Every choice feels consequential. Every misstep feels catastrophic. Eventually, he pulls away, not because he doesn't care, but because he feels trapped. Then he meets you. You care, but you don't cling. You invest, but you don't orbit. You love, but you don't dissolve. And suddenly, closeness doesn't feel like a cage. It feels like a place you can return to. That's unforgettable. You also don't confuse loyalty with endurance. You don't stay just to prove how much you can tolerate. You understand that loving deeply doesn't mean staying indefinitely. Sometimes loving deeply means walking away when staying would cost you your self-respect. And when you leave, you don't fall apart publicly. You grieve, yes, but privately, with dignity. You don't rewrite yourself to be more palatable. You don't beg to be chosen. You choose yourself again. That's another lesson that lingers, because it shows that love isn't about losing. It's about alignment. It's about two whole people walking in the same direction, not one dragging the other, not one shrinking to fit. You show men that a woman can be soft and strong at the same time, that she can be emotionally available without being emotionally dependent, that she can love deeply without making it her entire identity. That combination stays with them. Later in other relationships, they notice the difference. They notice when someone needs constant reassurance, when love feels anxious, when connection comes at the expense of individuality, and something in them resists because they've seen another way. They've seen love that doesn't demand self-erasure. You didn't teach that through lectures. You taught it by example, by continuing to be yourself even when you loved, by not abandoning your inner world for someone else's approval, by understanding that the most powerful form of love is the kind that says, I'm here and I'm still me. That's why they don't heal from you, because you didn't just love them. You showed them what love looks like when it's rooted in wholeness. And once someone experiences that, once they know what it feels like to be chosen by someone who doesn't need them to survive, but wants them to stay, it changes the standard forever. They may move on, they may try to recreate it, but they don't forget it. Because love like that doesn't fade, it sets a reference point, and everything else is measured against it. You don't love to be seen loving. You don't love to be applauded for it. You don't turn affection into a performance or connection into proof. When you love, you're just there, fully, quietly, intentionally. And in a world obsessed with appearances, that kind of presence feels almost radical. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're paying attention. Most people confuse love with effort that can be displayed. Big gestures, public declarations, over-the-top promises. They think love has to be loud to be real. But you know better. You understand that real love isn't about how it looks. It's about how it feels when no one else is watching. So when you're with someone, you're actually with them. You listen without checking your phone. You notice shifts in tone, pauses in speech, changes in energy. You remember what they said weeks ago and bring it back at the exact moment it matters. Not because you're keeping score, but because you're present enough to care. That kind of attention lands deep. Neuroscience backs this up. Feeling truly seen activates the same regions of the brain associated with safety and bonding. Not seen as an idea, not seen as a role, but seen as a person. Presence regulates the nervous system. It tells someone, without words, you matter right now. You offer that naturally. You don't rush conversations to get to the point. You don't half listen while planning what to say next. You let moments unfold. You let silence exist. And in that space, people reveal things they didn't even know they were holding. Men aren't used to that. They're used to being valued for what they provide, how they perform, how they show up externally. They're used to conversations that skim the surface and move on. They're used to attention that's conditional and fleeting. Then they sit across from you. And for once, they don't feel like they're being evaluated or entertained or measured. They feel accompanied. That's rare. You don't love in a way that demands constant reassurance. You don't need to be told you're special every 5 minutes. You don't require proof to feel secure. Your presence comes from inner steadiness, not from fear of losing someone. So when you show affection, it's grounded, it's consistent. It's not a spike, it's a current. And that consistency is what stays with people long after the relationship ends. There's a real life pattern that shows up again and again. A man dates someone who does all the right things. The gestures are there, the posts, the words, the plans. But something feels hollow. When he talks, she's distracted. When he struggles, she rushes past it. The connection exists more in theory than in reality. Then he meets you. You might not do anything extravagant, but when he talks, you're there. When he's quiet, you notice. When he's overwhelmed, you don't try to fix it immediately. You sit with him in it. You don't disappear emotionally when things get uncomfortable. And suddenly, love feels different. He feels less alone in his own life. You don't use love as a tool. You don't perform affection to secure loyalty or control outcomes. You're not loving for effect, you're loving for connection. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Because performance is exhausting. It creates pressure. It creates expectation. It turns love into something that has to be maintained instead of experienced. You refuse that. You understand that love isn't sustained by constant proving. It's sustained by presence that doesn't waver when things get real. There's also humility in how you love. You don't assume you already know someone. You stay curious, you ask questions, you allow people to change and reveal new layers. You don't lock them into a version of themselves that fits your narrative. That openness creates safety, because when someone knows they're allowed to evolve without losing your attention, they relax. They stop pretending, they stop performing back, and in that mutual presence, something genuine forms. You don't love loudly, but you love deeply. And depth leaves a mark. You also don't confuse being busy with being connected. You make time, not as a gesture, but as a priority. Even small moments count with you. A shared meal, a quiet walk. Sitting together without needing to fill the space. You understand that intimacy often lives in the ordinary. That understanding sets a standard. Men remember how it felt to be with someone who didn't rush past moments. Who didn't need constant stimulation to feel close, who could just be there without turning everything into content, drama, or performance. In your presence, life slows down, and when it's gone, the absence is loud. There's something else you do that's subtle but powerful. You don't use love as leverage. You don't withdraw affection to punish. You don't give attention conditionally. When you're present because you choose to be, not because you're trying to shape behavior. That integrity builds trust at a deep level, because love that's used as currency creates anxiety. Love that's given freely creates security. You understand that difference. You don't keep people guessing where they stand emotionally. You show up the same way on good days and hard ones. That reliability is grounding, and it teaches something important, that love doesn't have to be unstable to be exciting. That connection doesn't have to be unpredictable to be meaningful. That consistency isn't boring, it's safe. Men don't always realize how rare that is until they lose it. Later, they find themselves in relationships where affection feels performative, where presence comes and goes, where attention is fragmented, and something in them aches, not for the person you were, but for how they felt when they were with you, seen, heard, met. You didn't overwhelm them with love, you met them with it. You didn't try to be unforgettable, you were attentive, and attention is unforgettable. There's a quiet confidence in how you love. You're not afraid of intimacy, but you're not desperate for it either. You don't rush closeness, you allow it to grow organically. You understand that presence isn't something you force, it's something you offer. That patience creates depth instead of dependency. You don't disappear into someone's life, and you don't expect them to disappear into yours. You meet in the middle fully, honestly, and in that meeting, something real exists. That's why your love lingers. Because it wasn't a show, it was an experience, and experiences don't fade easily. People forget words, they forget gestures, they forget promises, but they don't forget how it felt to be with someone who was actually there, who wasn't distracted, who wasn't performing, who wasn't trying to be anything other than present. That's the kind of love that becomes a reference point, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. You're not the type of woman men forget because you broke them. You're unforgettable because you showed them what real connection feels like, honest, grounded, present, and unapologetically whole. You create safety without chaos, inspire growth without chasing, love deeply without losing yourself, hold people accountable with grace, and give your presence freely without performance. The impact you leave isn't measured in words or gestures, it's felt in the way someone carries themselves after they've been with you. It lingers in their choices, their standards, and the quiet moments when they realize what real love looks like. You don't ask for recognition, you don't demand change. You simply exist fully, and in doing so, you transform everyone who crosses your path. And that is the kind of presence that endures, the kind of love that doesn't fade, the kind of woman men don't heal from, not because you wounded them, but because you awakened them. Your power lies not in holding on, but in showing up, not in making someone depend on you, but in living so fully that your presence becomes unforgettable. That is the mark you leave on the world, and it will echo far beyond any single relationship.